come up. I think you're going to do your reflections from here, and I'll introduce you, please. Welcome back. Good afternoon. Just a quick preview of this afternoon's time together. We're going to hear from reflectors whom I will introduce in just a moment and continue the dialogue and the discussion for a period of time. We will then be going to the work groups, and I'll end this session with some directions for those groups where the secretary will work to facilitate a conversation based on some questions. We'll then reconvene and hear short summaries of that group work before we take a short break and gather together for Eucharist. So to begin this afternoon's conversations on the person of conscience, we have three reflectors. Antonio España is the General Director of El Recuerdo, a K-12 school in Spain. Father Jim Steger is the President of the Jesuit Secondary Education Association in the United States. And Mireia Abad is our Community Manager and will be bringing together people who are attending virtually for input. Antonio.
Buenas tardes.
Hi, good afternoon. As a reflector, I'm going to try and focus on three aspects or issues. I'll try and be very careful about time. First, the dialogue between Ignatian identity and creation of a solid personal conscience. Where can we get to? What's the point we can get to in this relationship? How to remember our identity and how to make it solid and intense and at the same time generate persons of conscience. I think here it's been helpful to go to the roots by means of the Ignatian examen and also by means of the narratives that we were reminded about in some of the St. Ignatius exercises on the life of Jesus. This might unite us in this creation of identity and solid personal conscience, as is the fact that the inner self work has to be together with external analysis. Second, it would be another issue that has been mentioned, diversity, both cultural and religious diversity in a horizon in which we are creating a network of Jesuit schools together with an Ignatian education requesting unity and demanding elements that are really neatly articulated by each and every school. So how to structure such diversity and how to get the positions to move closer, because when we are faced with religious and cultural diversity, different sensitivities are seen as well, and there are different ways of going about things. There are more or less secular places. There are places with more or less religious diversity. So then, how to live this Ignatian education within such a diverse cultural setting as we have right now? And finally, it's the issue of the moral conscience of justice. It was mentioned, especially at the beginning of the discussion, and dropped later on. It's justice coming from faith, when faced by poverty and crises and by injustice in the world, all of them growing. How to train, how to educate people of conscience, how to educate agents for change and stop being only utilitarian and give an education that is useful to meet the needs and the levels of each different country and go slightly beyond that, precisely because the growing conscience is not only a conscience of changing the unfair structures in my country or my region, but rather to open up to a world that is increasingly global. And there we have to know what means to go for, because on this, well, we have certain difficulties towards structuring something that is global, that can deal with the local and world injustice issues at the same time.
Jim Steger?
I want to talk also, reflect on a few things from this morning's presentation and conversation. First, that among the stakeholders that we heard listed, the three groups, students were identified, rightly so, I think, as this focal point. The context then with students is developmental realities. From a U.S. point of view, these are kids. And I think that's true for all of us. So that they are on a path, a trajectory towards wholeness. But they're adolescents or younger. And then our task, our educators' task, is to assist students in this quest, in their quest for meaning and transcendence. I really liked that line. What does it mean, then, for students to grow towards an understanding of excellence and success consistent with Ignatian values? What does it mean for students to grow toward an understanding of excellence and success consistent with Ignatian values? Something about relationship that stuck with me from this morning, the formation for influence. Well, first of all, formation for influence, to my Ignatian perspective, means that we desire for our students to help make the world a better place, put very generally. And there was a line that connected very clearly with that, a quotation: "We educators share a vision." And that connects with the students looking for models, experiencing models. And a further line, that those directing Jesuit schools are accompanying persons. They're accompanying the adults in the schools. We are accompanying persons on their own lifelong project. A few other comments. Concerning formation of conscience, I was taken by the innate human values of goodness, that this is part of who we are as we begin. And the context of community, think of a school as a community of value advocates. And you can think of all different values. You can in your own mind or in your conversation, what are the different communities of value advocates in that school? Those who advocate goodness, those who advocate attention to inequality, and so on. And others of various sorts. Schools set up vital experiences of community. And students thrive on these. They depend on these. We're very good at them. Final comment has to do with reflection and the examine. And it is this, that the goal of reflection and the examine is to go for depth. Go for depth. The starting point obviously is reflection, is experience, and then the reflection is on that experience. But it's go for depth. From a student's point of view, that reflection on his or her experience is, I'm going to use two expressions that when I first heard them were strange to me. The first one is, what am I? And that's a question about what does it mean to be a human being? What am I? And the second question is, why am I? What am I for? Why am I here? And these are fundamental questions that adolescents are dealing with. And in fact, I've seen experiences of much younger students grappling with those in particular contexts. The other thing I want to say, that all of this, whether people recognize it or not, we believe is God's work. so that we sit here recognizing that everything we speak of is in a faith context. Even though we are dealing with people who come at that from all different ways, and this week we'll be learning more about that. I will certainly be learning more about that from you, and have already begun. But whether people know it or not in our terms, and whether we recognize it or not in their terms, all of this, from an Ignatian point of view, is in a faith context. How that gets articulated or how that gets lifted up, that's a different matter, different area of expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim. Thank you, Jim. And now Mireya Abad.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. And in a parallel manner to this morning's presentations, there have been many people participating through the website and social networks. Some people here as well have given their opinion on the online side. Up till now in social networks, we have issues put forward such as how to get to the inner self in the midst of this noisy society. Jesuit schools are excellent in teaching excellence. Does this lead to gratitude in students? Another question posed is, what would happen if we were to challenge our students, telling them to teach or examine use at schools to their parents? On the other hand, there have been very interesting comments and remarks in the online discussion session from Barcelona. We were told, if the eyes of our students don't look towards their interior, they will never connect with themselves because God is in their hearts. From Colombia, we have a suggestion coming to us. It would be interesting to think, how can you work on the collective conscience in the school, not to think so much about the individual person, but rather about what is collective. We have also a point of contact between the online discussion and social networks. On the one hand, in the online discussion, people were saying that the examen actually helps to open the eyes of the soul towards the inside of the self and the world. But essentially, this means to be conscious in a contemplative way. And in the social networks, the question was, without losing our identity, how can we be open to diversity?
Thank you. So we have about 45 minutes for continued debates and dialogues. Thank you for these reflections. I'm sure there are many other reflections on the conversations from this morning. So I invite you at this time to please do as we did this morning. If you could keep your remarks to 3 minutes. I think we did a good job of getting a lot of people involved, and we'd like to do that again. And we're going to continue the discussions in groups. So who would like to begin this afternoon's discussions? Yes, here in the middle of the room, if we could get a microphone. Thank you to our reflectors.
Hola, buenas tardes. Enrique.
Hi, good afternoon. Enrica Turla from Barcelona. Well, these experiences that we heard about this morning, I really found very interesting about the examen. But I have a very simple idea to put forward. It's all very good to create new spaces and new times to work on the issue that we are dealing with today. But I think it's also worthwhile to take advantage of chances and opportunities that happen spontaneously. More than 80% of our time we devote to working on academic aspects. And I think that there are two didactic elements that come from the Ratio Studiorum, which are the repetition especially, and well used, these are two didactic elements that can be very useful for us to make headway in this. So let's see, repetition especially, because most teachers, usually once the subject has been completed, we go straight on to the next because we're always terrified of not having time to explain everything and do all the curricula that we have to work on. But it's good to have time for reflection when we finish one subject matter, to see what we have learned, to get students to reflect on what they have learned and how they have learned. this kind of reflection, it's metacognitive thinking or meta-learning, really. Well, I would say that that is the best moment to go for that. How have I learned? How what I've learned has an effect on my life? How what I've learned has an effect on the life of others? What did I feel learning this? So I think it's really an incredible opportunity that we have regularly, and we should really use it, take advantage of it, in the same way as repetition as well could be used. I think that pre-election and repetition are two classical techniques. I mean, they are used. I mean, they're there in the ratios to the Euro together with other techniques. But I think that it makes great sense to foster them, to promote them. And also, I think it's done in many schools already, but to work on the beginning and the end of the day as well. It's a very good chance, first to present what you're going to be working on, and at the end of the day, a synthesis, a summing up to help people to be conscious of what they have learned and how that affects their daily lives. So take advantage of the opportunities that life itself in the school is giving to us. It's quite a high percentage, isn't it? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think even within, depending upon a school schedule, so you talked about a whole school day, but even encouraged within a school schedule, the daily repetitions of setting the context and reviewing the context could also be cycles throughout the day. Someone had a hand up there in the back. Yes. From the Philippines.
And Everest from the Philippines. This morning we started to talk about do we see a change in our students? Are we becoming better, or becoming? We're talking not just about our consciousness, but effects on our behavior. And it reminds me that in the spiritual exercises, consciousness is just one step. We become aware of our prejudices, our disordered affections, and the whole dynamic of the exercises is to be aware of them and overcome them. And I was thinking about that story of the Good Samaritan. I think the priest and the Levite were conscious of what was happening, but they had their own prejudices. They probably felt they would become unclean if they touched him. Their own religious beliefs were preventing them from doing something. So the question, I think Ulrike had that question. We didn't have time to follow it up. How do I recognize my biases? How do I become conscious of my biases? How do I become conscious that I am really seeing reality as it is? In my own experience with students, for example, in my country, Philippines, there are often prejudices among Catholics about Muslims. Many of them are very poor in the South. But once they become friends with one of them, everything changes. That's what I've found. It seems to me that there is only so much we can do in the classroom. Prejudices about people are usually overcome because we see the other and we see that we have the same humanity. So I guess that, anyway, the question I wanted to present was, how do we move forward on this question of overcoming what Ignatius calls disordered affections? How do we overcome our biases? Because that really is what will change our behavior.
Thank you. Yes, how do we move to a greater freedom? And that's a similar question that Ulrika had in the process she presented earlier, the question of bias. Am I aware of the bias with which I listened or engaged in a conversation? Thank you. Who's next? Perhaps somebody that we have not heard from yet would be glad to participate. There's cameras. We are keeping track. Well, perhaps I would just introduce a question, which is the idea of challenge to this depth that we strive for in the context of the expectations of our schools being schools of excellence. I was mindful when George was presenting this morning, I believe in his first slide, he noted that within 10 years, of the founding of schools for the society, they were seen as the centers for education in Europe. I believe that was what you had said. And so that cultural expectation for excellence, I don't know that I know this for sure, but I'm going to be bold and say, I suspect that many of those people in civilly weren't necessarily interested in the same depth of education that the young society had set up, and yet they were there. So that balance between enculturating our schools to be attractive and excellent in certain contexts, and where that excellence becomes a risk. One of the questions posed by the lecture this morning was this balance between erudatio, I'm not saying that right, and pietas, eruditio and pietas. Any comment on the struggle, perhaps, there in your context for this balance between being an excellent school and being an excellent Jesuit school, and how we strike that balance? Yes.
Everybody in India would like to be number one. Schools would like to produce students who would be number one. But that is not we mean by Jesuit excellence. When we talk about Jesuit excellence, we imply excellence means human excellence. Excellence not for the sake of excellence itself. That excellence would mean comparison. I compare one person with other person. But when you talk about Jesuit excellence, it is more becoming aware of your own potential, your own capabilities, and developing your own potential, your capabilities to the maximum. That is for the greater glory of God.
Thank you. Yes.
Paweł Brzezieniak from Poland, a Jesuit priest. So we founded school just 3 years ago in poor, low-income area of Krakow. And we took over a public school. So this is the first example in Poland that religious order is running public school. So this is no tuition, completely free school. And we went to area which is very isolated from the city, because this is the problem of hooligans between two soccer team, and many parents didn't like to send to this public school children. And no one wanted to attend the school because the reputation was bad and wasn't attractive school. And we see that the problem is that many of our students, they don't have self-esteem, or self-esteem is very low, and they are not very proud of who they are. So I think the big challenge for us is to work with them, and then to show them and parents that also they are created by God, that God loved them, and they are important in society. And then the concept of conscience and the presence in the society, it's still far away from this place. So we still have to work how to help students to see some value in themselves. So this, I think this also shows us that in the Polish context is a good way for church to be more credible and present for people who really need some help. And it's also good for our Ignatius pedagogy to help souls. These souls really need some help and guidance and companion, and to show them that education can also change their life and the formation. So I think that the concept is still huge for us, and also working with teachers, because teachers don't believe that I'm doing important job. So they don't have this sense of mission and some important destination. I don't know how to explain that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, right in front of you. If you could hand the microphone to her. Thank you.
Yes, also about this question of excellence,
Can you introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
I'm Ilse Dekker from the Netherlands.
Thank you.
Also about this question of excellence, I think it has something to do with what was mentioned this morning about the difference between love and fear, because I've been doing the training with pupils who have a fear of failure, and we're always emphasizing their value in terms of grades. And I think it's very important to give some affirmation of their value as a human being. So it's a bit like what Pavel was saying before. It's very important to affirm their value as a human being, and for the teachers as well, because teachers are also often appreciated for their results. But we should teach our children, our students, they are important for who they are as a human being, and to emphasize love and not make them feel frightful because of they might have lesser results, I think.
Thank you. Someone else had a hand up right there. Right, it's right behind her. Thank you.
Mauricio García, Colombia.
Mauricio Garcia from Colombia. Yes, I would like to pay attention to the fact that the challenge of being persons of conscience and of training and educating persons of conscience takes us to another dynamism of these spiritual exercises. They are not only this being conscious and aware of something, but rather, first of all, it's moving affections and passions. It's moving the most profound desires that we have as human beings. And this, I believe, poses a challenge that, yes, has been followed in schools, but we have to go into it in greater depth. And it is how to work and how to help to grow in the world of desires of our young students, both small and great desires. The main great desire, of course, is God, but how to do pedagogy in that direction. And the dynamics of the exercises leads as well to a second aspect, which is commitment, the work. Of course, the aim of the exercises is the desire to give everything on the basis of a commitment, this apostolic task. And I'm sure we will be seeing it in the days to come in another one of the dimensions. But there is there an issue that connects with something that was mentioned in one of the two experiences. It's the Ignatian leadership. How do you translate this being conscient and aware to being an adequate leader for our societies? How to respond to that, how to meet the challenge. As the Society of Jesus, we have solved the tension between faith and justice that was the challenge in recent years, and that was seen sometimes as two sides of the same coin. And even, well, in Latin America, it generated quite serious conflict in some of the provinces. But there, yes, we have a job to do, in that we have to make being a person of conscience means commitment and leadership in order to generate societies that are more based on justice, sustainability and peace. And I think then that is a challenge, this Ignatian leadership. And we have to go for experiences that help us get there. There are many already in many schools, both in Colombia and elsewhere. I have heard about a number of different experiences in that direction, but I think we have to go into this more deeply. We have to link this being persons of conscience with also feel loved by God and also called to go for social transformation.
Thank you. Right behind. Yes, thank you.
Enric, Barcelona.
Yes, if we analyze Ignatius' itinerary or journey, there is a very strong expression which is to help the souls, the animas, as an expression that is to be found in the whole of the trajectory of Ignatius. So then in the process of his spiritual identification, there's always a finality, a goal to attain, and that's where he aims his spiritual itinerary, and it's always to help others. And that opening outward, that helping others, actually contextualizes all this exercise of working for the person of conscience. So that, I believe, is an important element to help others. Before, Antonio, in his feedback, was telling us about the tension between Ignatian identity and a well-formed identity. We're not going to just suggest to students in our schools to have a kind of solid, well-defined identity. There's much more. There's more than that. There's a framework that is something that we can't negotiate because it is part of our Ignatian identity. And it means to see what is there. And it means as well to see the victim on the ground following the Good Samaritan parable, yeah? I mean, we can't let people in our schools to affirm their identity, forgetting others that might require their help. So this, I think, is something that we should work on, and that's where we connect conscience and compassion.
Thank you. Yes, just to the left there. And then we'll go to the back.
Chris Gleason, Melbourne, Australia. I'm worried about all these cameras. I was interested in what Father Jose Mesa said at the very end of the morning session, that there's a tension, a tension between in our Ignatian identity and the whole area of diversity. I hope I'm not doing Father George an injustice, but I thought I heard him say we cannot use the spiritual exercises in a multi-dimensional religious context. I think I heard him say that. I hope that's a true statement of what he said, a true repetition of what he said. But I'm thinking to myself, why not? Why can't we use the spiritual exercises in that context? And in fact, I think in our Asia-Pacific assistancy, in such many diverse cultures, that's exactly what we're doing. So I think that issue of Ignatian identity, that's who we are, that's our engine, if you like. And I think we take that with us into whatever diverse situations, whatever noisy, diverse situations we confront.
Thank you. There was someone in the back of the room there.
Paul Donovan. Is this on? Paul Donovan, Canada, Montreal. The thought that keeps occurring to me again is the question of why. Just the question why. And we were talking about excellence, and we were talking about how the Jesuits very early on became known as the educators of Europe and known for their excellence. But what is it that gives Jesuit education its excellence? Is it because we look around at the things that the other schools are doing and that the world's doing and all that sort of stuff and we do it better? Or is it because what's offered at a Jesuit school is a true reflection of what it is to be a human being? And when human beings are able to thrive, that leads to excellence. I just recently spent time with the exercises, and so it's very powerful for me right now in terms of what it says. And just from a personal experience recently, I just had this image of being alone in a desert, completely alone. And all the things that I thought gave me value are gone. It's just me standing there in the desert with God. And if at that moment I can recognize my value, and not as a human being or an instance of a human being that's created, but as Paul, that you have value because I called you Paul, and I love you. And when that freedom comes, that without all my trappings and all my education and all the things that I have, and all the things that I have, that I can recognize my value, that's where the freedom to thrive comes from. So I was listening to the story of the kids in Poland that are not sure of their own self-esteem, and they're not going to get that by just becoming more educated. That's a false sense of what our self-esteem is from. It comes from that sense of being called by God, and then I'm free for those talents to be able to grow. We can't lose that. That, for me, is at the core of what Jesuit education is all about. And if we put everything else and sort of build it around there and think, well, it's excellence in our education here, or it's our ability, we're going to lose what it is to be Jesuit educators. And I just keep coming back to that and want to emphasize that. Thank you.
Yes, we'll come up front here, please. Someone, that's fine. Okay, we'll go to Ed next and then back up here. Yes, sir.
My name is Agustin Kalubi from DRC, that's Congo in Africa. We have heard a lot about the network for education. In the morning we heard, this afternoon it has come again. Formation for influence also has come. Ignatian leadership has come back again. My worry is about the network that we want to make. The youth that we have to form are not in touch only with Jesuit schools or their families. They are also meeting other youth outside our schools. So what's happening on the street, they bring it back to the school. And what we can do in our school may not take root because of the influence of the street or the influence of the contact they have with other schools. About our network of Ignatian education, what do we think of the network with other schools? Maybe not being Jesuit, not being Ignatian, but having also something good, maybe better than us, or maybe those who are very low that would need our help. I think of Latin America, which has the network of Fe Alegria. It has maybe a label of being Jesuit, but it is not a Jesuit network of school. It is intercommunitarian. There are many communities involved in. But now that we are speaking of Ignatian pedagogy, they will need to apply it. Are they going to impose themselves to others, or there is a kind of collaboration, kind of network that they need to create? I say for Latin America because it is clear, but in other places you have also other Catholic schools who are inspired by the Jesuit schools. So how to deal with this in matter of forming people of conscience without stressing too much with what is strongly Ignatian, even if it is our identity.
Thank you. Let's go back to the middle of the room, and then we'll come up here. Ed?
Ed Fassett from the U.S., California province. Three things came to me in this conversation that's been going on. The first deals with people mentioned the self-esteem issues of students, the difference between love and fear, and overcoming biases. I've kind of grouped those together as those are first week in the exercises issues. That if I can't get to the point in the exercises where I feel God's love, then I really can't move on to developing a deeper relationship with the Lord. So there's something about creating an environment in our schools where our students realize that they're loved by God and that love empowers them to do something. So we talk about freedom from lack, freedom from being poor, freedom from lack of self-esteem. But we also talk about a freedom for something. And that's the movement of the exercises to deepen my relationship with the Lord. As my tertian master told me, our job is to keep it relational because everything is relational. It's all about a relationship with one another and with God. I think it's also important to recognize that, moving students to understanding their most profound desires is an ultimate goal. It may not happen during the 4 years that we have them in school. One of the assessments that a spiritual director should make is whether the person, the retreatant, is ready for the exercises. And that doesn't mean that they don't do the spiritual exercises. They'll do some Ignatian spirituality formation, but it won't be the 4 weeks of the exercises. And so I think part of our question about the students that we accept into our schools is, are they ready for this? And if they're not quite ready, then what do we need to do to help them be ready? So again, what's the environment that we're creating in the school that helps them find within themselves this desire to deepen this relationship with one another and with God?
Thank you, Ed. I think we had someone up here, please. Yes?
Sí.
Yeah, without changing the idea or the line of thought, but maybe changing the register of what we're talking about somehow, I think that the conceptual frameworks frequently are the ones ruling our behavior. When one goes in search of excellence, being aware of what the conceptual frameworks are that are actually influencing our way of thinking and our way of assessing and on our beliefs and ideas that we've not even put to the test are incredibly important. Cognitive psychology states that it's only possible to modify behavior if before that we exert an influence on conceptual frameworks, the frameworks for belief. And conceptual frameworks, frameworks of belief, very often are based and hide behind the images that we use. And I reflect, and I know that many of us do, and we discover ourselves using images through our language, such as images that belong to a mechanical system, practically to a Swiss watch. You know, people say this school has to, be smooth. It has to work like a well-oiled machine. And really, this is a mechanicist conceptual framework, really. That's not, I think, the most adequate for the Jesus experience. There are other frameworks. I call them cheating frameworks. For example, the one of theater, or the operating theater, where the framework is a role distribution. And sometimes, people say, yeah, this is a ship. I'm the captain. I'm not leaving till either we sink or we sail. Well, this distribution of roles is also a representation. It's a system of representations. When in fact, the deep image is that of a living system. It's the image that was used to say, when I was alone in the desert. It's a really living image, and an image of a living being that can love, that can be free, that can be grateful, that can search. And I think that the use that we do of such images is the link that will make it possible for us to change conceptual frameworks to reach excellence.
Thank you. Excellent. Right next to you, and then we're going to come up here. Yes.
Carlos, Jesuita, España.
Yes, I come from Spain. Right now, I think it would be useful to talk about evaluation or assessment criteria. How do we evaluate? How do we assess conscience of a student? The way to do it might be to think of itineraries, or at least stages. And my suggestion is to talk of narratives, or taking this image concept to say that we know stories of success, of the development of a person towards conscience, and we can tell those tales. And on the basis of those narratives, of those stories, we can talk then of stages and eventually get to assessment criteria. We could specify on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I know, and we're going to come up here. In my school, that conversation about observation and storytelling for development, I think, is very important. And yet sometimes it comes up against metrics and measurements. And that's very hard to do with the interiority of a human person, I think. And yet The Gospels are a series of stories, and Jesus used parables as a way of forming people in conscience. And so I like that image very much. Yes.
Pepe Menéndez de Barcelona.
Pepe Menéndez, Barcelona, Spain. This afternoon, I think, we've seen that there are schools placed in social and economic regions that are very different to each other. And we can see, of course, different sensitivities. Some people talk about the person of conscience that has to be aware of the suffering of others. There are many schools where the suffering people are. And I think that there are schools as well that have to be conscious schools. Those are the conscious teachers that go on to action, that have to consider or should consider that the people they have there are sons and daughters of God that have as much right to be loved as others. I'm saying because I get the impression that here there's this twofold or double condition, yeah? Let us not forget that many Jesuit schools are placed in suffering areas, not in regions where you have to make students aware of the suffering of others, but rather in areas where the students are suffering already. And furthermore, I think in this situation it's very, very important to work on self-esteem. It's been mentioned already, especially from the Poland representative. I mean, I work in vocational training, and the first task was not to teach anything, just to teach them that they were sons and daughters of God, that they had a lifelong project and they had a life ahead of them. So I think in our discussion we should not forget that, yeah? I mean, we're moving in a very, very wide framework. Not only students that have to be made conscious, but also teachers in schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, in the back of the room.
My name is Thomas. I'm from Cameroon. As we are talking about conscience, I see that conscience, understood as being people of conscience, is already present in our schools with all what we do as Jesuit institutions. But now we want to increase it. As we evaluate, we realize that people are in a certain way conscious of many things, and this interrelationship with God is present. But when we come to practical things like the examen we talked about this morning, it becomes a little bit difficult because we are caught between many values. Excellence, academic excellence is also a value. And now we need to move to this, I can say, this value of integral excellence that is not just academic, but the whole person, and getting people in relationship with other. And I think that is what makes things difficult for us, for me in my school. I can practice examine in my religion class. Maybe I can take 2 minutes with my students. But it's difficult to get the whole staff involved in this idea. What is the key? That's my question. What is the key to get the staff involved in this practice? Because it's something practical that can help. People agree that we need to work toward conscience, but taking 2 minutes is very difficult to get 2,000 people, 2,000 students involved in examen, for example. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sister.
Montserrat del Pozo.
Montserrat del Pozo from Rome. I would rather be a bit afraid. I've been listening. I don't want us to teach students to be the way we are with our criteria and seeing the things the way we see them. What we have to do is make sure that students have great self-esteem, that they trust themselves to eventually deploy that good, and in order to do things in a different way from us, but on the basis of security. With the parable of the Good Samaritan, I would say that that student doesn't only have to come close and cure, but he or she should also feel responsible for that victim of violence. And then he or she would be competent enough to look for other people to help if that were the case, for the person to be well looked after. It means to generate sensitivity from him or herself, not from us as educators. And so then I would say really that this is thinking of design, because it's another way of seeing things, not only from the left hemisphere of the brain. There's also a right hemisphere that's more holistic. And I think that students are better at that right hemisphere than we are. One of the problems we encounter sometimes is that students work with old brains. We are old brains. Our students have a different way of thinking, of interacting. And if you listened to the father the other day, he was talking about it, with meditation. So let us trust that the student, of course, we have to make sure that our students have that self-esteem and that security in themselves, so we have to offer them the tools. But sometimes, they surprise us because they are much beyond where we can even aspire to teach or assess.
Yes, right up front here. Thank you. And then we will go back there. Yes.
Luisilla, Barcelona, España.
Luisilla, Barcelona, Spain. All the time we're spending talking about the person of conscience, well, makes me think of an idea intensely. I'd say obsessively. When I stand in front of you now, or at any point in time, when a teacher is standing in front of his or her students, typically it is done as the person who knows, that has the knowledge or has the action. And I think that when we talk about being a person of conscience and having consciousness and awareness, there's a kind of slight change of position in such a way that what I know, what I do, has great importance, but secondary, really, because the main importance here is what I am. And it means I move from being the one who knows to the one who learns, who is a learner. And in the Christian language, I would say a person looking for salvation, the person who feels he or she is a sinner, as happens in Eucharist every time we celebrate it. And this change of position is sometimes difficult to do if we don't change as well our physical position or our psychological position within the group. When we talk of conscience, then we talk of what we are, and it has to do more with irradiation rather than action. I was just thinking out loud here. I wanted to share this with you.
Thank you very much. I have a woman here, and then right in front of her, and then there. And that'll probably be the time we have for this session, so the three of you would have a couple of minutes each.
I'm Jennifer Dias from India. In the morning session, Father George certainly set the momentum for some concrete steps and action to be taken in our schools. From one of his suggestions, the question that arose was, can Jesuit schools undertake, that is keeping in mind our inadequacies, take up some time-bound action research projects where we provide 21st century skills to create a learning, a nurturing environment to form men and women for others. This could, in turn, develop the sensitivity issue in our children, developing persons of conscience. For example, the case study of Malala can be taken. There could be a deliberation happening between our students, and the thinking tool provided could be the 6 thinking hats of Edward de Bono, where Sister just mentioned, we encourage the child to exercise their right brain activities. And given the Indian context, I would pose some questions from the right to the RT, the Right to Education Act of 2009, where we ask for every child, every woman to be educated. So here is Malala, the world global perspective, and the Indian perspective, where every woman needs to be empowered and need to be educated. What are those thinking skills? Maybe creativity, reflective thinking, inquirers, just to take a few, because IB schools have all these, and Jesuit schools are lagging behind. So Father George mentioned about British councils taking up these projects. So I think we have to set up this Jesuit forum whereby we exchange all these projects and come up with this idea whereby everything is quantifiable. It can be measured. There are rubrics, there are certain parameters, there are certain criteria that are laid down, there is evaluation and assessment. In this, all the thinking tools can be provided. All the stakeholders can also take part in this project, whereby we have a parental feedback form, a teacher's feedback form, a peer teacher's feedback form, a sharing with other schools, networking with Jesuit schools locally, nationally, and internationally. This is all in keeping with the GC 35. As I've gone to the whole document, can we take these baby steps? That is my sincere appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. And then quickly, we have two more.
Alejandro Harari from Argentina. Yes, I was thinking while I was listening to the different people participating on the issue of excellence and humanist excellence. That is not only academic excellence, but also excellence of the human being as such. And this gives great value to the meeting because the panelists were talking about this going in depth. And indeed, this is so. We can organize meetings for our students and our staff, our educators work on this, and especially with this parable of the Good Samaritan. So to reach true excellence, we should look for depth in the meetings with our students and our educators. Thank you.
This will be our last comment before some instructions for the break.
Jim Bopp, Phoenix, Arizona. I just want to follow up on Sister's comment about the sense of urgency that we should have with our students. In the world that they live in now, we have to remember that there are darker voices and there are louder voices than ours that it's increasingly difficult to protect them from, that they see and are exposed to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so trusting them and helping to form them for the world that they're in now is just so important. I remember part of what attracted me to Jesuit mission and worldviews when I was young was growing up in a relatively sheltered environment. It seemed so scandalous. It was radical, and now I think it's a challenge to give students an experience of seeing something radical or scandalous when much of what they see every day is something that would have appeared scandalous to us when we were younger.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation. I'm afraid because of time we're going to need to limit that, but there are discussions and conversations to continue. So just as a repetition or a reflection and considering again the world view of the society, thank you for those different views from Spain, the United States, Poland, India, the Netherlands, Colombia, Australia, Asia Pacific, Canada, the Congo, Cameroon, Rome, and Argentina. We're going to move and begin sharply at 4:15, so you'll have 15 minutes to move to your small groups. And the small groups are coded by the color of your pass, and when you look at the elevators in the postings area, as well as you will know which room that you're going to go to. And in those groups, you'll be focused on 3 questions. The questions will be handed out to you as you leave, but I want to offer them as a prelection. So the first question for discussion is, if educating the person of conscience is still something crucial in our secularized, multi-religious societies, how can we remain loyal to our identity while we welcome diversity, religions, secular, social? The second question for our group discussions, as the speaker was asking, how can we use our growing world Jesuit school network to establish greater contact and knowledge amongst each other, thus creating a greater conscience? And the third question, how can we prioritize and further detail the work for persons of conscience in our schools when schedules and timetables are so tight? Each group has been assigned a secretary. The group meetings will go from 4:15 until 5:15. Everyone is asked to reconvene here at 5:30 sharp, and each group secretary is going to be asked to share on one of those three questions from your group in just a short period of time. Please remember when you come back at 5:30 that you have this piece with you so that we can turn them in for the evening. Yes? Okay, you're to your group discussions. Hold on, Javier. Your group is first, your group floor and room is indicated on the elevators. There's a code, but just look at the color and it will tell you. Color and floor and you'll know where to go. Okay? If anyone is lost, come back here and I'll wait. And I will help find you there. I will accompany your soul to your group meeting. Thank you.